Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving hundreds of millions of dollars to school districts in the form of a free gift that can be used for anything, teacher salaries or whatever your district needs. All right. Today's guest is another wonderful superintendent in the great state of Texas. And before we get into our conversation, I want to give a shout out to our co-host, Corinne French.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to get this started with Dr. Kuhn.
Yes, so excited. Dr. Kuhn from Mineral Wells ISD. Dr. Kuhn, thank you for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I know how busy things are as a school superintendent, especially with the year wrapping up. So just to kind of jump in here, tell us a little bit about your background for those listening in.
All right. Grew up in rural Texas, graduated high school, went to college, and wanted to be a writer, wanted to be a sports writer, actually. So I got an English degree, and my mom insisted that I get a teaching certificate with that. And I really didn't want to. I have three sisters. I'm the youngest, so I've got three older sisters, and they are all teachers. And so I wanted to do something, in my mind, more exciting than that. But I went ahead and got the teaching certificate. Got out of college, and I spent 2 years living in Peru doing some volunteer mission work. And when I came back, ended up teaching Spanish. So I taught high school Spanish, English as a second language in a rural Texas school, very near Possum Kingdom Lake, if you happen to know where that is. And
Yes.
enjoyed teaching. What I found out when I first started was I really like teenagers. They're funny. I can be sarcastic with them, So I was a high school teacher, and I did K through 12 English as a second language, just because from living in Peru, I was bilingual and it just was a natural fit. So I really fell in love with the ESL program, and I wanted to go into administration kind of in that world, like an ESL coordinator type position. So I went and got my master's, decided I needed some experience in a larger school district. So I moved to where I'm at right now, Mineral Wells, which enrollment here is about 3,350 kids. So quite a bit larger than the school that I graduated from, quite a bit larger than the school I started my career in. And spent a couple of years as a teacher and a school bus driver teaching Spanish and ESL, and then got promoted to assistant principal. Did that for several years, and then I got the principal job. Did that for several years and worked on my superintendency. Went back to college and got my first superintendent job back in my hometown. Spent 6 years there, and then the superintendent job here in Mineral Wells, where I had been prior, came open. I applied for that, and I've been here ever since. So I've been in Mineral Wells. This is my 7th year, so 13 years now as a superintendent.
Wow. That's a cool background. That's different than, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Corinne. I don't think we've heard anything. So
I think we've had one guest, and we need to figure out who it was so we could have you all part of a mastermind later. But one guest, the parent wanted them to get the alt-cert also. And so I think that's a fun connection. I bet you were thanking your parents for sure for that decision.
Oh, there's days where I certainly do not thank them for railroading me into this job, but then there's other days where I'm very, very grateful. It's a great career, honestly. I love what I do, but there are days,
For sure.
yes, we all have those days. I think that, it goes with any career, right?
Probably so.
Well, so this is really cool. So one thing we like to do is highlight public education and some of the great things that are happening out there. And also the leaders that are listening in, they all have different challenges. And one thing that's really cool about all our different guests is, yes, a lot of them are superintendents or board members, but they all come from different backgrounds and they view things through a different lens because of those backgrounds. And just curious, Dr. Kuhn, what is something you are very passionate about in public ed right now?
Well, I think you really just encapsulated what I'm passionate about when you talked about the different backgrounds that public educators come from. I think that is the heart of public education. Not only do the leaders and the teachers and the people involved in public education, the adults, come from varied backgrounds, but the students that are served by the public education system come from every background that exists in the United States. We have students from every ethnic subpopulation. We have students from every socioeconomic situation, from every family situation, from every religious background, hundreds of language backgrounds, across the United States that are served by the public education system. I think the public education system, as it was envisioned in all of the state constitutions, as it was envisioned a long time ago in the early 1800s, coming from Massachusetts and then spreading across the United States. I think it was a genius idea that our ancestors had in this country, and I think it is the reason that our country has had some of the economic success and some of even the military power, and then space exploration, and the many things that our nation has been able to do that other nations haven't been able to pull off. I think the lion's share of the credit for the successes of our country. And I'm not saying our country's perfect. Obviously, we have many things we can improve on, but the lion's share of some of the most successful parts and things that we've done as a country, I think it all goes back to, we made a decision at some point, we're going to educate all children. We're going to give them all a fundamental education in literacy, arithmetic, reading, and we've expanded on that promise. We've incorporated other subject areas, and we've incorporated character education and civics and so many other things. And I in my mind, the reason I landed in this career, and the reason I love this career, when I was looking for something to do with my life, it had to have meaning. It had to be bigger than me. It had to be bigger than just collecting a paycheck. And I have found that in public education. I believe not just me, but everybody that works in public education gets up every day and makes the world a better place. I believe public education, the public schoolhouse, is the last bastion of democracy, where we take all the kids and put them together. There's not a lot of togetherness. When you think about where we go to church, a lot of times we have Black churches, we have white churches, we have Hispanic churches. Here in Texas, we have cowboy churches, right? And so
right.
we when you get online, who do you follow? Who follows you? We kind of curate what we hear and who we hear it from. We don't want to be around people we disagree with, and I guess that's human nature, right? Democracy doesn't work if that's what we do, and in public schools we don't do that. It makes it a hard job, because a lot of times when there is some sort of red meat social issue going on, what my experience has been as a superintendent, even as a principal, assistant principal, people want us to join their side. The left wants us to join the left, the right wants us to join the right. And in the meantime, those of us who take this calling seriously, we're not on anybody's side. We're on the side of education. We're on the side of kids, and trying to help them grow up into responsible adults who can be contributing members of society, and who can live up to their own aspirations, and reach those highest levels of hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that's invaluable. It's indispensable. And as it's being attempted to be chipped away by those who want to privatize the system, what they're wanting to turn the system into is a tribal system, like so much else in our society is. And when we lose the public education system, when we lose that nature, that democratic nature of the public education system, where we have representative school boards that are responding to their community's values and mores, and are building an educational system that in that community makes sense and wins the respect and the support of the community, and educates all the kids from all the corners of that community. And when we lose that, we're gonna lose everything, in my mind.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, you said so many things I want to come back to. First, I love that local control is so important. Absolutely so important. And you mentioned the word four corners of the district, and I love that. But I want to take a time to have you share something. And I love our guests to know that we never put our guest, I love our listeners to know we never put our guest in a corner and try to surprise them. But you said something that makes me feel like you have some encouragement to give. When you're thinking of those hot topic issues that can divide people, you don't have the luxury to make those lines in the sand necessarily, unless it's helping all kids, all kids in your district. What kind of encouragement can you give to leaders right now that have felt like the last couple of years almost took them out? We have one of the highest rates of people leaving academia and K-12 ever. And I know, and the value of encouraging people to do the alternative certification, or to consider maybe going into public ed after a different kind of career. What kind of encouragement do you have for those that are still there, and we would probably both agree that need to stay in K-12?
I think the biggest encouragement I can give is that the need has never been greater. That's what got me into education. That's when I became a teacher and I put in, say, my first 6 weeks of work, and it clicked in my head that I like this. I want to do this. I'm not mad at my mom for, having to get a teaching certificate anymore because it fits me. Right.
Right.
Well, the reason it fit was because I could go home in the afternoon and talk to my wife and feel like, these kids, they need someone like me in their life. And that's not me being arrogant or egotistical or anything. It's just me trying to be a good person and realizing at the end of the day that today I got to try and be a good person and in front of people who need to see good people. Right. So there's never been a greater need now for authentic community. And that's what schools are. We are within the walls of the schoolhouse. We're an authentic community. We eat together, we play together, we cry together. We have kids who, like girls who can't afford a prom dress, and teachers go out and buy them a prom dress. I mean, there's so many stories like that people that aren't in education don't see, especially, kind of the fire breathing critics of public education who just see it as an expense rather than an investment in our society. And, it frustrates me how short-sighted folks are when they're like, how can we do education cheaper? And all their solutions are always really would gut what is really, the most beneficial of education. Obviously, instruction is super important, and making sure kids are learning the essential knowledge and skills that they need to learn. I mean, all that's super, super important, but the societal impact and the civics and the engagement and the community that is built in a school, the fact that at least in Texas, I don't know about the rest of the country, but our little tiny rural towns, they identify 100% with that school mascot, and they have pirate pride or wildcat pride or bulldog pride that goes back to the parents and the grandparents. That's glue that holds these little places together. And when the school is gone, the community often is gone. There's nothing else there. There may be a store, there may be some churches or whatever, but the school is the heart of a little town like that. And when you come into bigger towns, obviously, things are more complex, the economy of a big city or whatever, but that doesn't change the fact of how important that school is. And so to circle back to your question, what I would tell anybody that needs encouragement, which I think we all do right now, is you've never been more needed. And so, can you leave this career and go find something that is easier? Yes. Can you leave this career and go find something that pays better? Probably. Can you leave this career and go find something that is helping to save this country and make this country a better place? Yeah, there's other careers out there. My dad was a firefighter. There are folks that devote their lives to public service. But we need the people that are doing it to stay, and we need other people, the people whose heart is in the right place to start doing this job.
Thank you.
Love it. Yeah. So I know you touched on a point there, and you mentioned funding, right? Or getting additional dollars. And I heard somebody quote it recently. They say, money doesn't bring you happiness, but money solves a lot of problems that will make you happy. And I imagine especially with diversity, differences in equity, lots of situations. We've had other guests as well that have talked about some of the struggles with some of those. There's gaps, right? There's gaps when it comes to funding. What have you seen around challenges related to funding, or maybe you're not seeing any challenges related to funding right now?
Yeah, I think there'll always be challenges around funding. What I've seen, and this is going to be peculiar to Texas, my first year as a superintendent was 2010, and the state was simultaneously severely reducing educational dollars and at the same time increasing the standardized testing requirements of schools. They had proposed having 15 end of course tests, all of which would be required for graduation. These are state standardized tests, and all of which would actually impact the student GPAs, which would impact students ability to get into colleges. That ended up blowing up in their face because it activated moms who did not like that model. But at that time in Texas, equity was a really severe problem because the school funding system is built on property taxes here. And so one community may have, a $2 or $3 billion tax base, so that when they go out and put down a penny of tax effort, it generates a lot more money than another school district whose tax base is $100 million, much 10 or less % of the other school districts. And so the reality has been historically, if you live in a community with high residential values, nice houses, or a community that happens to have some sort of really big industry or big, commercial enterprise there, that you can generate more school funding with the same tax effort, right? And that was just, there were just so many lawsuits over that in Texas. And I have a little bit of good news, from the last few years, the last maybe decade here, is that it has gotten better. I've also probably tempered a little bit my expectations to understand it's never going to be perfect. There's not a perfect mechanism for gathering up the money. Well, the perfect mechanism would be some sort of statewide, tax that is then doled out on a per pupil basis pretty much evenly throughout the state, with weights for students in special circumstances with special needs who are maybe more costly to educate. Texas has a constitutional prohibition against a statewide sales tax or a statewide income tax, so that's not a real solution here. So I've learned to accept, like, good instead of perfect. And it's certainly not perfect. And I'm in a community with a pretty high, level of student poverty. And now our tax base has been growing, which is really, really nice. But there are certainly communities near us in Texas that are kind of bedroom communities around the Fort Worth, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex that can, if they go out for a bond, they can raise a lot more money with a much lower tax rate than we can. I don't spend a lot of my time wringing my hands and saying that's not fair. We just try to be real creative and do the best work we can with the resources we have. It can be frustrating because you want it to be fair. You want it to be fair to everybody. But I used to really get upset about that. But now I've learned to really kind of focus my energy more on, making things work the best I can for my kids.
Love it. Yeah, I like that mindset where it's not like a victim mindset. It's a mindset of, hey, we're working with what we have, and and it's very optimistic. I really like that.
Also, if I can jump in, one of the other things that is a struggle sometimes for us on the inside of the education system is to put ourselves in the shoes of the people on the outside of the education system. And, taxpayers, it's hard to pay taxes. It's hard to have a home and have to pay property taxes on it and see like your appraisal goes up because, right now, at least where I'm at, appraisals are going up pretty dramatically. And so you see that tax bill that you're getting. And so I try to be respectful to the taxpayers, and you can't have an attitude that we're entitled to this funding. You have to be respectful and say, these taxpayers are paying taxes for a service, and we owe them a really, really good quality service, so that they can have a school that they're proud of, so that you can generate excitement, enthusiasm about your community, so people will want to move there, so people will want to start a new business there, right? Schools can't operate without understanding their role in like the economic environment. We're a key driver and a key part of the economic development of a community, and we have to embrace that part of our job as well.
I think you bring a good point that most districts do a really great job with what they're given, and I don't know that they always communicate that to the community, to the stakeholders. And I think it's there can be an assumption that if you need something for the school, just go to the state for more money. And as simple as that sounds, I don't think you ever want to dismiss the fact that it's a difficult thing to understand why you can't just go get for more if it's a state system. And so I think even communicating to the stakeholders, look, we get it, and here's what we've done with what we've got. Here's what we would like to do. Here's a plan A, B, C, but we need you. I think that communicating and telling your story, I think in the past, maybe 20, 30 years ago, that wasn't as important, but now with online sources and people can look up anything about a district, there's got to be good stuff happening in your district, and you have to tell those stories. So tell us, I know we're getting short on time. Tell us something wonderful that happened this year that just kept you going. A quick little story of something encouraging that kept you going this fall.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things that's going on in Mineral Wells right now is we've always struggled to find bilingual teachers. There are more bilingual teacher positions than there are bilingual teachers in our state. And so I've got a lady that works for me that has just worked tirelessly, looking everywhere she can look to find bilingual teachers. And so if you go back in time 7 or 8 years, we had 3 bilingual teachers and we needed about 16 to be compliant with what the state requires us in terms. Texas requires you to offer a bilingual classroom for every 20 kids from a same language background, right? Mm-hmm. And so we had like 3. Well, that's not nearly enough. And this year we're up to 13. And we've had telephone interviews with people who lived in Mexico. We have these 3 sisters. We hired the first sister, and then we got her younger sister to join us, and then we got the third sister to join us. And so that's one of my favorite stories, is just watching that success story unfold. It wasn't just this year, it's been over the last several years, but and the result of that, and I'm not a huge fan of the STAR test, but our bilingual ESL student subpopulation is outperforming our general population on the STAR test at almost every elementary grade, both reading and math. And so huge success story for us locally. And I'm really, really happy about it.
Congratulations. That's remarkable.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yes, I love hearing those stories. That's so exciting. Okay, now we have our question here.
The final question.
Okay.
This would be the most difficult one, Dr. Kuhn. All right. If you were to give a shout out to someone, who would you recommend come on here and share their story like you did today?
Does it need to be a superintendent, or like what category of folks are you looking for?
Someone in public ed that you think should get the word out on something exciting they're doing, maybe their story, and maybe they're helping others overcome challenges like you are.
Okay. All right. I've got one name. He's not in public ed, but he's a pretty fierce advocate for public ed. And I don't know if that counts. If it needs to be an employee of an educational system, then that's going to exclude this person.
No, not at all. It could be more than one person too.
All right. So the first one I will mention is Charles Foster Johnson. He's a leader of an organization called Pastors for Texas Kids. And they've worked tirelessly over the last several years to extol the virtues and the need for a healthy, strong public education system among the pastors of churches in Texas. And he's done really, really incredible work just helping churches across Texas team up with public schools and getting members of those churches to support public schools. So he's the first one I would mention. I have a whole list of great superintendent colleagues. I would suggest actually maybe having an interview or two where you've got several superintendents in the room together, because when we get together and talk, or we have our text group sometimes where when something new comes along, we're like, oh my gosh, how are y'all handling this? We can be pretty fun when we're all in a room together. So any superintendent, I've got a whole list of them I could name for you.
We just might have to take you up on that. I think that's a great idea. Gary and I've been talking about doing some kind of a mastermind and different options. And that might be really great if you're willing to come on and do that with us. You see our style. We're here just to bring about good information. And so you could help be I don't know, can you have 3 co-hosts for an event like that? And we can have a mastermind that way. Thank you for the shout out for Charles. He's a dear friend. Gary will love getting to meet him. It'll be another one where I'll have to just be really careful not to ask too many questions and let Gary to get a chance to interview Charles. You will love Charles. So thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, I thought I recognized the name. So Corinne's mentioned him in the past. So we'll have to have him on here for sure.
He's dynamic. He is.
Awesome.
Well, you have been dynamic. This has been encouraging to me. I'm always encouraged by the guests we have. You can tell you are a bright light out in Mineral Wells. I'm in the Valley View area, and so I feel like I'm almost seeing your light shine from there. And so thank you for that.
Come visit us sometime. We got a great little town.
I will.
Awesome. Well, I will close out. Dr. Kuhn, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Corinne, thank you for being an awesome co-host as usual. And before we close out completely, just want to give one more shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's given hundreds of millions of dollars. I think last time I checked, it was $675 million to public ed, over 180 districts in Texas so far. And so if your district does need funding, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those of y'all who have been listening, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.